How's it going, guys? My name's Will from Ghost Hack, and today I'm going to be showing you how I would make super heavy and super effective Reese basses in SERUM. It sounds like this. Alright, now before I actually begin explaining the sound that I had right there and going over that, I'm going to just explain the concept of Reese bass just in its basics, and then I'm going to explain what people normally do and what I'm doing that's different and why specifically I like to do that. If you don't have any interest in that, you can skip to this timestamp right here, and that'll take you to right when I'm actually explaining the sound in SERUM. But if you have time, I recommend you sticking through the beginning. It's not going to be long, but it's going to really help you out when you're kind of, conceptualizing how you make your Reese basses. Now, the main concept of a Reese bass is a bass at low octaves where you essentially take two sounds and you're detuning them slightly. So I have two saw waves playing at the same time, and let me turn this down a little bit, and I'm going to detune them so it'll have this kind of warbly effect. Now that's an extreme version of that, but you can hear that sort of warbly effect caused by the phase cancellation. This happens because, as you can see, these two oscillators, they're really close in pitch. They're not exactly the same, and they're not super far off, they're really close. So about 50% of the time, the phases will be lined up in a positive way where they line up and they just make the sound louder. But then, since they're moving at slightly different speeds, every now and then the phases will be completely offset, and then they'll kind of cancel each other out. It's a weird process. I could talk for a long time about phase cancellation and what exactly that means, but basically the more detuned you have it, the faster that sort of wobbling up and down is going to be. Like, for example, you can see when I move this pitch around. And the higher you go, it's also going to wobble around faster. See, it doesn't wobble around very fast down there. And the problem with that, as you may hear, is that in order to get a nice fast wobble, it has to become very, very detuned. Right here, I have it up like 100% on the fine tuning, which is essentially just, one semitone up. Like if I move this up one semitone, really just doing that. And that sounds no good, especially down in the low octaves. It sounds really messy, and I really don't like that. Now, there are ways to sort of manipulate this, especially in other plugins, where you can make your Reese that way, and it can turn out a little better, especially if you're into like resampling or resynthesizing and stuff like that. You can do some fancy stuff to make a nice Reese that way, but I much prefer to do it a different way. The way that I prefer to do it is take one saw wave, or whatever waveform you want, and then in the other table, let's take just a sine wave. Let's go basic shapes, sine wave. So now we hear the saw wave, and there's our sine wave. And what we can do now is just pitch around this sine wave a little bit with the fine tune. Now, you may not be able to hear it, but take a look at this spectrum up here. It's kind of small, but you can see the bottom frequency going up and down. Only the bottom frequency is Reesing, because only this frequency is messing up this waveform. All the other frequencies on top of it are they're just a saw wave. It's just 100% solid. But since only the sine wave is happening in that area, only that area is getting sort of reesed or wobbled around. And now I can pitch this to, some more extreme numbers. And you can't really hear that weird detuned difference that you got from that other one. The only problem is it doesn't sound like it's Reesing. Now, this is a very important concept, is when you're doing this, what makes the Reese a Reese bass is when you add distortion. So I'm going to take distortion. We'll just hear what it sounds like with tube distortion all the way up. It's really messy, but now you can hear the whole sound is actually Reesing, and now not just that bottom frequency, because it's all coming together and getting pounded through the distortion, and that bottom frequency going up and down in volume is affecting the rest of the frequencies without affecting their pitch. And now you can definitely hear the difference between like me changing this fine tune it still sounds very crisp and very harsh and very, you know, in one frequency. It sounds like it has a good strong pitch, but it is still reesing together. So that's how I would kind of avoid the problem of, like, you know, goofy sounding detuned Reeses that don't really work in the mix next to other melodic elements. And now I'm going to go over, you know, all the specific settings that I use to make this patch itself. It's just in SERUM and it's not using any post-processing at all. So to start off, we're going to take a saw wave. And what I'm going to do here, just right off the bat, once it's down 1 octave, is I'm going to take this macro right here, and I just called it the speed because it's kind of going to be controlling the speed of sort of the reesing and the wobbling of the sound. And I applied it to the fine tune and brought it down about like 35 or so. And I'm going to do a similar thing to oscillator B, but basically you can hear a slight change in pitch. It might be more apparent if I play a higher note. It's going to be slightly different in pitch. However, once we go through the distortion and the sine wave stuff that I explained earlier, it's going to kind of get rid of that and it's going to go back to being a good solid main pitch. So other than that, we literally just have the default saw wave right here. It's nothing complicated at all. Then in oscillator B, we're going to drop it down an octave and load a sine wave like we did in the beginning. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the speed, except instead of going down 35, I'm going to go up 35. So when I turn this speed up, the pitches of the saw wave and the sine wave just kind of drift apart a little bit. It's not even a full semitone. It's only just part of the way up and down. So it's not going to be that drastic that we get too much harmonic dissonance. It's still going to be pretty solid, but it's just going to add more flavor to the Reese itself and it'll make it go faster. So when the speed's all the way down, we get this. And then when the speed gets turned up, we get this. It's hard to hear, but you can hear the bottom frequency, you know, rising up and down faster and faster as I turn that speed knob up. And now after that, there's going to be more things to do in the main section, but I just want to throw on the distortion like I did in the beginning, so we can just go ahead and get a grip of our Reese bass and really hear what we're working with. Now this is up at 97%, not quite all the way, but it still works very well. So now we have something a little fatter and a little juicier. It's very crispy, but we're going to work with this. The next thing I want to add is a little bit of sub. However, I'm just using the sub oscillator as a normal frequency. I'm not using it as a sub because as you can see, the octave is up 1. If I turn these guys off, it's way up there while the other ones are down low. And when I mix in this volume, you can hear what it does. Now we're getting something really strong and powerful in the mid frequencies. So I just set it somewhere I liked. I liked it just somewhere around midway, maybe a little above. If that's not really to your liking, you can always bring it down a little bit more and make it slightly more subtle. I like it about right there. I think it sounds good. And this gives good harmonic texture. It once again solidifies the root note and makes the Reese bass itself sound a lot less harmonically dissonant and more just harmonically pure and heavy. After that, I threw on a little bit of noise. This isn't exactly necessary. I just like to do it. It really dirties up the Reese and it makes the high end a lot more fuzzy, and it adds some crunch, especially going through all that distortion. And there's one more thing I want to do in the main section here. This isn't that complicated of a sound, but what I want to do in the main section is bring the phase of this oscillator all the way down, because as you can see, the random phase for both of these oscillators is down all the way, so it's starting at exactly the same place every time we press a note. So I want to be able to control the phase of this, because this is going to affect how the Reese sounds when you first hit the note, right? And it is subtle, but I'll show you what I mean by this. Right now the start is up pretty high, it's at like 93, but if I move this around, there are a lot of different places you can start it. I chose right here because I liked it starting on kind of a deeper clean note, but I could easily go like this. And and have it start on a little more of a noisy impact, but I'm just going to keep it right there for now. And that's the purpose of controlling the phase like that. The next thing I wanted to do is add a phaser, and what I really wanted to do with this phaser is create kind of this guitar amp technique. That's what I've heard other people call it. That's what I like to call it. But I'll turn the rate down all the way, the depth down all the way, and the frequency down all the way. Now, if the mix is all the way up, I just brought the feedback down too, but this is what it would sound like. It just, highlights certain mid frequencies, and it kind of resembles the, frequency spectrum of a guitar amp. So I'm just going to mix that in a little bit. I think it adds some nice warmth and texture. Then after that, a little bit of hyperdimension. I don't go too crazy on the hyperdimension. Some people do, but I just really chose not to for this Reese. I have a little bit of the hyper right here, like 14-15%. And then with this, I just brought the size down and brought the mix up about the same amount. This will add just a slight bit of dimension. Just a little bit of spread. You can go a little heavier with this if you want to, but that's just not personally something I did. Then after that, I added a little bit of chorus, doing similar stuff. It's just giving a little bit more frequency spread. I have this preset right here. The rate is down pretty low. So is the delay 1 and delay 2. I brought the depth down a bit, and I made sure that it wasn't like low passing. It's a high pass filter right now. And the mix just sounds like this all the way up. So a nice and spread out sound, and it's a good sound to mix in. Now after that, this Reese is very high frequency. There are a lot of very high frequencies that you can hear in this, like way up at the top. And I wanted to control those a little bit. So what I did was I actually took the like note tracking right here, this key tracking. You can see where the green little note is going to correspond to how high or low on the keyboard I'm playing. Like this is a low note right here. Now let me play a high note. Oh, it went up like that. So that's what we're going to use to kind of control this low pass filter frequency, because I've set this EQ to a low pass. And as you can see, I've put the note on here. So this is at just above 2K. And then I brought it up 38% with this sort of note latch frequency thing. Also, to control this, to give me more customization options, I have this macro 2 here set to damping. I just called it damp. And then I have it going bipolar on this guy right here. So let's say I want it to be, less high frequency. I can just bring it down. Let's say I want there to be more crispy high frequencies. I'll bring it up. And there we go. I didn't want there to be that many high frequencies. As you can see, I've pretty much just brought it all the way up. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. About to 50%. And now when I go higher, this filter will open up a little bit more due to it, being controlled by what note I'm playing. Doing stuff like that can get, a little tricky or a little bit tedious if you really don't know what's happening, but it's not a necessary thing. That's just something I decided to do. You basically have the same sound without it. And then after that, I have multiband compression to just pound it through a multiband compressor. And then I brought the threshold down to like -11, -12, something like that. So it's nice and thick. Sounds good. And after that, I just added a touch of reverb. This is just something I wanted to do. It sounds nice to have like a little bit of room in the back. So you can see the mix is only up about 15%. It's just a little bit, but it's on plate reverb. Have the width all the way up. You can see where I have the low cut and the high cut, just making sure there aren't any low frequencies. Pre-delay is all the way down, and the size is at 23. So it's a very short delay. It's also very metallic, so it sounds good in the high end. Just has a short kind of release to the sound. All right, and that's pretty much the sound. Of course, you could add further post-processing afterward, like maybe I'd add more, multiband compression, like OTTs and maybe a vocoder or like some other fun stuff. But just coming out of SERUM, I think this sound is very solid. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you like the sound below, and I hope this gave you just some tips or tricks and like things to think about when you're making your own Reese basses, because these can come in very handy if you've ever struggled with doing this, especially in SERUM. We really appreciate all of your support, and I will see you in the next video. Happy producing.